Welcome to the 8th episode of our show, The Second Sex. We're exploring Simone de Beauvoir's groundbreaking work and its lasting impact on feminist thought.
And today, we're really getting into it.
Yeah, today we're diving deep into Chapter 3 of History, specifically looking at pages 117 to 132.
Right, this is where Beauvoir really starts building her historical case. Looking at these very early stages of human society.
Trying to figure out how female subjugation might have started?
Exactly. She's looking at the relationship with nature, how tools developed, and how that might have led to, well, male dominance.
And this whole idea of woman as the other, that's huge in this section.
Absolutely fundamental. And we'll also touch on those early feminine divinities, like the great goddess figures. Powerful, yes, but maybe still defined by men. It's complex.
Okay, so let's start unpacking that first point, the biological and economic roots. What's Beauvoir arguing there?
Well, she points to this potential divergence. The female, biologically, is more tied to the species through motherhood. It's a sort of heavier biological destiny, you could say.
Whereas men.
Men, particularly with the advent of tools, could engage in activities, in projects that seem to transcend just basic survival. Hunting large animals, building things, activities that involved risk and transformation.
So it wasn't just about, practical stuff. It was about value.
That's the core of it. Beauvoir suggests humanity, or maybe specifically man in this context, sought to rise above mere biology, above nature.
And these projects, these tool-using activities, became the benchmark.
Kind of, yeah. They represented transcending limitations. So this active value-creating role came to be seen as, well, existence itself having value. More value, perhaps, than just sustaining life.
Which then subtly subjugates nature, and woman who is seen as closer to nature.
Exactly. Male activity defines the terms, defines what's important, what constitutes real value, and everything else gets measured against that. Nature and woman by association become resources or objects within that system.
Okay, that flows directly into this idea of woman as the other. Can you elaborate on that? Because it feels so key.
It really is.
Yeah.
Her argument is that the self, the subject, always defines itself against something else. An other.
We need comparison to define ourselves.
Sort of. And in this dynamic, man posits himself as the default, the same, the norm.
And because woman is biologically different,
she naturally falls into the category of the other, the one who is different from the norm.
Was it always about gender, this other concept?
Not necessarily, not exclusively at the very beginning, she argues. The concept of otherness could apply to different tribes, foreigners, nature itself, but woman's biological difference made her a sort of prime candidate for this role.
And this association grew over time.
Yes, especially as cosmologies developed, belief systems about the universe. Woman's role, particularly linked to fertility and nature, became more solidified within this other category.
Like the Babylonian example you mentioned earlier, the ocean and sea.
Right, that's a good illustration. These primal forces, representing chaos or the unknown before order, were the other to the structured world. And significantly, they could be seen as embodying both male and female aspects, showing the idea wasn't initially purely tied to sex.
Interesting. So it evolves.
It evolves, and the association with the feminine strengthens.
Which brings us to the great goddess figures. This seems like a time where maybe things were different, where female power was acknowledged.
On the surface, absolutely. You see the rise of these powerful female deities, massive amounts of worship focused on fertility. It definitely looks like a period of significant feminine spiritual influence.
You mentioned the statue found in Susa.
Yeah, one of the oldest representations, a figure in a long robe, this really elaborate hairstyle, sometimes even wearing a crown shaped like city towers. Clearly a figure of immense importance.
And in Crete, too, right? Lots of different types.
Oh, definitely. You find figures that are statopagus, very full-figured, emphasizing fertility, some crouching, some thin and standing, clothed, naked, often with arms under swollen breasts. It shows she wasn't just one thing.
She was multifaceted.
Very. Queen of Heaven, the dove symbol. Empress of Hades, the underworld, the serpent symbol. She was seen in mountains, woods, springs, the sea, everywhere.
Power over life and death.
Yes, absolutely. Seen as both the giver of life and the one who takes it back. Powerful, but also unpredictable, fickle, even dangerous, like nature itself, perhaps.
And she had different names everywhere.
Lots of them. Ishtar in Babylon, Astarte for Semitic peoples, Gaia, Rhea, Cybele among the Greeks, Isis in Egypt. The list goes on. Her worship was incredibly widespread across Western Asia.
And male gods were secondary?
Often, yes. In many of these cults, the male deity was her son or consort, subordinate to her power. It seems like a reversal of later patterns.
Okay, so you have this powerful goddess figure. How did that translate to actual women on Earth, according to Beauvoir? Did they share in that power?
Well, yes and no. Women were seen as reflections of this divine feminine principle. This meant they were surrounded by taboos,
Taboos, like restrictions.
restrictions, but also a kind of sacredness. Woman herself became taboo, set apart, potentially powerful, maybe a bit dangerous. Her connection to life cycles, menstruation, childbirth, it was seen as potent magic.
So she was seen as a kind of magician or sorceress?
In a way, yes. Possessing inherent magical virtues tied to life forces. This meant she was often included in prayers, rituals for fertility, and community well-being.
Did they hold positions like priestesses?
Sometimes, yes. Beauvoir mentions the Druidesses among the ancient Celts as an example. There's also evidence she notes of women participating in tribal governance, sometimes even holding command. Their perceived connection to life was vital to the clan.
It sounds quite powerful in its own way.
It does. The birth of children, the health of livestock, good harvest, these were often felt to depend on women, on their quote-unquote magic virtues, the life the group flowed through them.
But, and this feels like the crucial Beauvoir twist, she argues that despite all this, men never really gave up control.
Exactly. That's the critical counterpoint. Even when men were perhaps genuinely in awe or even fearful of woman's perceived magic, even when they elevated her as this essential figure, the goddess mother.
It was still men doing the elevating.
Precisely. It was the male consciousness that was defining her, positing her as essential. And in the very act of defining the other, the male subject implicitly reaffirms his own position as the one who defines the essential self.
Okay. So the power dynamic established earlier, based on activity and projects, still underlies this.
That's the argument. Think back to the analogy she uses. Man becomes master of the fertile earth he cultivates.
Right.
Well, woman, embodying that fertility, becomes associated with the earth, something to be possessed, managed, exploited, even if revered.
So the prestige was granted, not inherent from her own perspective.
In a sense, yes. It came from men. They knelt before the other. They worshipped the goddess. But it was all happening within a reality, structured and defined by male consciousness.
Even the idols themselves
Are ultimately dependent on their creators. Beauvoir's point is that any idol invented by humans, however terrifying or powerful it seems, is ultimately contingent on the humans who invented it.
Which means they can also be destroyed or replaced.
Exactly. The power to create implies the power to destroy. This dependence might have been implicit, maybe not fully conscious in very early societies, but it was there.
And it would become more explicit later.
Yes. As man developed, let's say, a clearer self-consciousness, a stronger sense of his own agency, he would eventually dare to assert himself more fully, challenging that feminine mystique.
Wow. So pulling this all together, what does this deep dive into early history tell us about the power dynamics that Beauvoir sees continuing through time?
Well, it suggests these patterns are incredibly deep-rooted. The way biological differences were interpreted, combined with how early societies and economies developed, really laid the groundwork for seeing woman as fundamentally other.
And even when there was apparent reverence, like with the great goddess.
It could still exist within a framework where the masculine was the default, the definer. That seemingly powerful role was ultimately shaped and contained by a male-centric view.
It really makes you consider how these ancient ways of categorizing people, of setting up a norm versus an other.
How much they might still be subtly operating today, even when we think we've moved past them.
Yeah, it's a powerful question. How does defining any group as other continue to shape our world?
And perhaps understanding these very old historical roots, the way Beauvoir lays them out, is kind of essential if we want to move towards something more genuinely equitable.
Definitely food for thought. Thanks for walking through this fascinating and pretty complex part of the text.